Hey traders, in this lesson I'm going to show you how to create an RSI Superstack indicator. So this was a question from a student in the previous mastery course that I created for version 4 of PineScript. And what he wanted to do was get 3 different time frames calculating the RSI on the one indicator. So here we have the 15-minute chart, the 60-minute chart, and the 4-hour chart. And we are getting the RSI value on these 3 time frames, drawing them into this RSI indicator. And when all 3 of them go overbought or oversold, the background of the indicator changes color. So when all 3 are oversold, the background color turns green. And when all 3 are overbought, it turns red. Now this indicator is quite simple. So let's jump over to the editor and get started. So here we are in the Pine editor. I have an indicator script here with overlay turned off by default. It's set to false by default, and I'm not overriding it here to true, so that's why we're drawing into our own box. And then I get some user input. So we only have 6 inputs here. We have our RSI length, which is 14 by default. We have our overbought level, which is 70 by default. We have our oversold level, which is 30 by default. Then we have our 3 time frames, the 15-minute, 60-minute, and 4-hour by default. Time frame 1, 2, and 3. We're going to use these time frames and these RSI levels to analyze the RSI across these 3 time frames. So once I get my user inputs, the next thing I do is declare a custom security function. Now this is just to keep things a little bit tidier and organized. It's completely optional. And what we have here is just the same security function as the regime filter lesson. So go back and watch the regime filter lesson if you want to better understand what this function does. Again, even this far into the course, each lesson builds on the previous. So as we progress and get more complicated with the course, I still encourage you to check out lessons even if you might not be interested in the subject, just because you might learn a new way to apply something in PineScript that is relevant to all scripts, not just the subject matter at hand. Anyway, once we declare our custom function, the next thing to do is get the RSI value across our 3 timeframes. So I'll say here, get RSI on all timeframes. And the first variable is going to be called RSI timeframe 1. And then I can copy this line 2 more times, and we'll create 3 variables here, timeframe 1, timeframe 2, timeframe 3. And the first one is going to be set to f_security. And then we'll pass in our symbol_info.ticker_ID. And then we'll pass in timeframe 1 from the settings menu, so 15 by default. And then we need to pass in our expression. So in this case, that's going to be the RSI indicator. So ta.rsi will use the close source as the standard RSI price source. And our length will be our RSI length from the settings menu here. Now I can copy this line of code and paste it in twice, change each resolution, each time frame to the corresponding time frame for each RSI. So our 3 user inputs here. And now we have the RSI across all 3 timeframes. The next thing we need to do is check our overbought and our oversold levels. So for overbought levels, I need 3 new variables. So RSI OB1 will be set to, is RSI timeframe 1 greater than or equal to our RSI overbought level from the settings menu? Now I can copy this line of code, paste it twice, and I just need to change our numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and there's our 3 RSI overbought levels. We can do the same thing for our oversold levels. So RSI oversold equals RSI timeframe 1 less than or equal to RSI oversold from the settings menu. So let me copy this line of code and paste it a couple of times, change our numbers again. There we go. We have our overbought and oversold levels across our 3 RSI values. The final thing to do is plot our RSIs. So the first thing I'm going to do is plot our RSI levels. So I'm going to use a H line here to plot my overbought level. I'll set the color to color.gray and the title to RSI overbought. I can copy this, paste it down there. I'll paste this in 3 times. Change this to OS for oversold and change that to say oversold. And our final H line, horizontal line, is going to be the midpoint. So I'll change this to 50 and change this to say midpoint. And I will also change the transparency of our midpoint to 50%, just so that it's a little bit different to our overbought and oversold levels. So now if I save the code, bring our editor down a bit, we have our upper overbought level and lower oversold level and our 50 midpoint. Now we need to draw our 3 RSIs. So I'll use the plot function here and we'll plot RSI underscore timeframe 1 with a color of, and here I'm going to use a ternary operation or conditional operator and say, is the RSI OB1 true? So is the RSI overbought on this first time frame? If so, I want to set the RSI to color.purple. Otherwise, if it's not overbought, I want to set it to color.green. And we'll title this as well. We'll title this RSI timeframe number 1. Save my code. And we should now be getting the 15-minute timeframes RSI drawing onto our chart. And when it goes overbought, it should turn purple. And in fact, I want this to turn purple if the RSI is oversold or overbought. So we can also add in here, is the RSI OB1 variable true? Or is RSI underscore OS1 true? Now when I save the code, we should be getting a purple line here and a purple line up here. Perfect. So now I can copy this plot and paste it in 2 more times, change all of our numbers to 2 and 3, save the code. We should have 3 RSIs drawing now from different time frames. And let's change the color for each one as well to differentiate them. The second one will change to red and the final one will change to orange. Save the code. And there we have our 3 RSIs drawing onto the chart. And when any of them go overbought or oversold, they all turn purple. So we're nearly done with this script. The final thing to do is generate alerts when this condition is met and change the background color of our indicator box. So I'm going to create a new section here called detect RSI Superstack condition. And we're going to have 2 variables here, overbought trigger and oversold trigger. And I have 3 G's in there. I need to get a new keyboard. My keyboard is playing up on me. Sometimes I press the key once and it types it twice. It's very annoying when you're coding. So for overbought trigger, we're going to check if all of our RSI overbought variables are true. So we need to say, is RSI overbought 1 true? And is RSI overbought 2 true? And is RSI overbought 3 true? If all 3 of these are true, then OB trigger will be set to true. We can do the same for our oversold. RSI oversold 1 and RSI oversold 2 and RSI oversold 3. And now we have our 2 overbought and oversold triggers. Now we can change the background color of our indicator based on these conditions. So we can say here, is overbought trigger true? Question mark. If so, set the background color to red. Otherwise, is oversold trigger true? If so, then set the back color to green. Otherwise, if neither overbought and oversold is true, then we just leave the background color alone, set it to NA. And I'll title this RSI trigger. Now let's save the code and see what happens. And there we go. Whenever all 3 RSIs go oversold, in this case, the background color turns green. And when they all turn to overbought, like up here, for example, the background color turns red, indicating that price might be a little bit overextended to the upside, and we may be about to see a retracement or correction. That's the purpose of this indicator. The only thing more powerful than 1 RSI is 3, I suppose. And that was the logic behind the student who requested this lesson. But anyway, for the final feature of this, let us trigger an alert. So for this, I'm going to merge these 2 triggers into 1 alert. You could separate them if you want to using 2 different alert conditions. But for today, let's just merge these into 1 alert. So for this, I need to check, is overbought trigger true? Or is oversold trigger true? And then we need to set a title. So I'll call this RSI Superstack. And the message can be, let's start it with the ticker ID, the symbol, the market we're on, the name of the market, the ticker at the market. And then let's say ticker has 3 RSI values at extreme levels. And that will do. I'll get rid of some of this white space, save my code. And now we have our RSI Superstack indicator completed. Now you could reference any indicator values. It doesn't need to be an RSI. It could be any TA function. So you could get any of these functions, any of these technical analysis indicators. You can get the values from these and pass them into your security function expression, and you can compare indicator values across multiple timeframes and even markets. You could change the symbol here if you wanted to other markets as well, and this would get the RSI value of a different market to what you have loaded on your chart. Anyway, that will do it for this lesson. I hope you found this interesting. If you did, the source code will be below for you to play around with if you want to explore this concept further. And for now, I'll leave it there, and I'll speak with you in the next lesson.